Verhelok Sol. I am Skeggy Vetter, and welcome to the Norse Code. In today's episode, which is our 10th episode, we will be covering the great wolf Fenrir. Now, Fenrir is the wolf god. He is the great wolf. He's the son of Loki and Angrboda, the brother of Hel and Jormungandr, father of Hati and Skoll, and we'll talk more about Hati and Skoll later. He's also possibly known as Garm. Again, we'll talk about that later. And the word Fenrir itself means marsh dweller, which once again will come into play later. So, his birth. Loki and the Jotun witch Angrboda had 3 children. Hel, who was half dead and half alive, Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, and Fenrir, the great wolf. Now these 3 children, they frightened Odin. See, he already knew about the prophecy of Ragnarok. And he knew that Loki's 3 children would be playing a major role in the downfall of the gods. So, in an attempt to stop Ragnarok, which incidentally ended up causing Ragnarok, which you'll find is a recurring theme throughout these stories, especially the ones where Odin's trying to stop Ragnarok. He kind of forces it to happen and trying to stop it. Anyway, so what he does is he sends Hel to what became known as Helheim, the land of the dead. And she became the ruler of the dead, and she ruled that on Odin's behalf. Jormungandr was tossed into the ocean, where he ended up growing to immense size, eventually surrounding the earth surrounding Midgard, and keeping the waters within Midgard. And there's a whole lot of stories with Jormungandr and Thor, and that's going to be a really fun one to cover, and probably do that sometime over the summer. But Fenrir was accepted into Asgard and adopted by the gods. They thought that if they train Fenrir, if they bring him in and treat him as one of them, that there'll be no reason for him to revolt and fight back and cause Ragnarok. But most of the gods did not want the wolf among them, and he was a pup. So somebody needed to take charge and train him and help him and teach him and all that, and nobody stepped up to do it. No god wanted that responsibility. So the god of law and honor stepped up to be the guardian of Fenrir, and that was Tyr. Now, Fenrir grew quite rapidly. He showed no signs of stopping. He just grew and grew and grew. And as he got bigger, naturally, he got stronger. And he wanted nothing more than to please the gods. See, think of all these stories of the gods. They're always testing their strength and winning battles and doing this feat or that feat and being able to praise themselves and to brag and all this. And so Fenrir wanted to be part of that. He wanted to be accepted by the gods. He wanted to be one of them. He wanted to be liked. And so he thought the best way to do that was to show how strong he truly was. So whenever possible, he would show off how strong he was, probably to a fault. So he would run through Asgard and the 9 realms and fight and ravage and seeking the gods' approval in doing all this. But the gods did not approve of it. In fact, they were quite unnerved and frightened by Fenrir. So they demanded that something be done and that the wolf be chained up. But by this time, the great Fenrir has grown too big and too strong and could not be easily contained and chained up. So the gods developed a little bit of trickery to get Fenrir to willingly accept his chains. So what they developed was a series of tests. They went to Fenrir and said, look, we see how strong you are, and we see how powerful you are, and we want to test that. We want to see just how strong you are. So Fenrir was thrilled. So they chained him up and said, try and break loose. To which he easily broke the chains. And so Thor comes and says, I will forge some chains, and these chains will hold that beast. So Thor forges some chains. They go to Fenrir and said, we have another set of chains that we would like to see if they can contain you. So let us chain you, and then we'll see if your strength can truly break these chains. So once again, they chain up Fenrir, and he starts to thrash. And this one was a little bit harder, but he broke these chains too. So the gods, fearing that not even Thor can make chains that will hold the wolf, they go to the dwarves. And they ask the dwarves, we need chains to hold this wolf, something that is unbreakable. And so the dwarves, being as clever as they are, go and forge these chains out of things that don't exist. It is useless to struggle against something that doesn't exist. So by forging the chains out of things that don't exist, there's no point struggling against it. You won't be able to break it. So what the dwarves used was the sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, roots of a mountain, sinew of bear, breath of fish, and saliva of birds. All things that basically don't exist. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen cats walk around. They don't generally make footsteps that are audible. Women do not grow beards, typically. Mountains do not have roots. Bears do not have sinew. Fish do not breathe, with the couple exceptions that actually can breathe oxygen. And birds typically do not have saliva. At least not much. And so the dwarves took these things and forged the chains, and they gave Gleipnir, which is the name of the chains, to the gods to hold Fenrir. And so they go to the wolf and they say, Fenrir, we have one last set of chains that we would like to test your strength. But by this point, Fenrir, who was actually quite intelligent, suspected trickery. So he demanded that one of the gods put their hand in his mouth. And this way, if it is a trick, the god would lose a hand. Now, the gods all knew this was in fact a trick. And none of them were willing to lose a hand. But they had to do something. So once again, it was Tyr. So Tyr went up and said, don't worry, Fenrir. I will put my hand in your mouth, for this is not a trick. And he puts his hand in Fenrir's mouth. Fenrir allows them to bind him with the chains, and he begins to thrash against them. But he could not break them. And so he thrashes some more, and he could not break these chains. Eventually, he admitted defeat and asked the gods to unbind him. But the gods would not. And so Fenrir chopped down and took off Tyr's right hand. Tyr is very often depicted as only having one hand, and this is why. The gods took the chain, tied it to a boulder, placed a sword in Fenrir's mouth, with the point up towards the roof of his mouth, to keep him from closing his mouth. And as Fenrir howls in pain, sorrow, and anger, the drool that just pours out of his gaping maw runs like a river, a frothy river. That river is known as Van, which means expectation. But Fenrir will eventually break those chains, and when he breaks those chains, that will trigger Ragnarok. And he will run across Midgard. He will devour the earth. He will devour the sky. His children, Hati and Skoll, who have spent their life chasing the sun and the moon, Hati chasing the sun and Skoll chasing the moon, they will finally catch them and eat them. And finally, Fenrir will confront Odin, who he blames for his imprisonment, and he will fight Odin, and Odin will lose. But Odin's son Vidar, seeing the wolf kill Odin, will kill the wolf in vengeance of his father's death. And that ends all the stories we have of Fenrir. See, we don't really know the timeline very well. We know that the Voluspa, which is Odin gaining the prophecy of Ragnarok, takes place before Loki has his children. And then Loki has his children, and then everything with Fenrir. But there's no set timeline. It could be days, weeks, years, eons, for all we know. But this is all we know on Fenrir. Or is it? For there is another wolf mentioned in the Poetic Edda, Garm. Garm is called the greatest amongst the wolves. He is said to be tied up by the gods, and that he will escape come Ragnarok. In fact, there are, side by side, Fenrir and Garm are identical. The only difference is in the stories. Fenrir fights and kills Odin. Garm fights and kills Tyr. It's possible that Garm and Fenrir are the same wolf. It is possible that Fenrir fights and kills both Tyr and Odin. Or maybe there's just two wolves that live parallel lives right up until the very end. We'll actually see this a lot. Well, not a lot, but a couple times as we continue to study the gods. Another notable example would be Freya and Frigga. They live parallel lives with only small differences between them. And a lot of scholars believe that Freya and Frigga may actually be the same goddess, just going under two different names. But we'll leave more of that for another episode. But here, personally, I do believe that Fenrir and Garm are the same wolf god. But I suppose we'll never know unless we get to talk to Fenrir and or Garm ourselves. Well, really, for any gods, I guess any of the gods would know. I'll have to remember that next time I meditate. So this brings me to a very important question. I'm going to start by telling a story about myself. A couple years ago, my dogs got into a fight. And when I went to pull them apart, one dog bit my left hand and one dog bit my right. I probably should have went to get stitches, but I'm stubborn and I did not. So instead, what happened was I wrapped my hands up myself, and I had a lot of pain and swelling and a little bit of nerve damage. In fact, it took months before I was able to fully use the thumb on my right hand again. But for at least, I believe it was about 7 to 9 days, my hands were useless. I could barely type. I couldn't write. Couldn't barely pick up fork and spoon, which is rough because all of my hobbies require my hands, and so I could do nothing but sit there. And during this time, I found myself constantly being drawn to Fenrir. Up until this point, I viewed Fenrir as a monster. I viewed Fenrir as the enemy. But then as I just felt this connection with him during this time, I read his story more, and instead I felt bad for him. And the reason why is everything that I have here for Fenrir, misunderstood or monster. Fenrir wanted to fit in with the gods. He didn't want to destroy everything. He wanted to be with them. He wanted them to accept him. And the gods, this is an unfortunate story in which the gods do not come out on top in terms of the moral high ground. The gods, rather than working with him, talking to him, training him, Fenrir was an intelligent wolf. They could have explained to him that, look, you're a little too much. You need to dial it back. We understand you're strong, but you're just too much. And again, the timing, we don't really know. Fenrir can still be within his puppy phase at this point, and anyone who's ever had a puppy knows that they're just pretty much little cute furry balls of terror until they get a little bit older. And if Fenrir was in that phase, what are the guys to do but to discipline, to work with, and to tolerate Fenrir until he grows a little more, mentally grows, that is. And then Tyr, who is the only god who treated Fenrir well. He was the only god who really treated him the way that he should be treated, who was an active participant in the deceit that ultimately chained up Fenrir. In Fenrir's eyes, this is, his, I guess you could say, father, the way that we would say we are our dog's father or mother. This is his guardian. And he actively deceived him to chain him up. Fenrir should be pitied, not feared. He's a poor wolf who was mistreated and cast aside. He has every right to be angry and every right to seek vengeance. And really, I just feel bad for him. And this, when I was sitting there with my hands all torn up, I couldn't help but feel bad for Fenrir. And my whole view on him completely changed. And it was at that point that I decided I needed to start working with Fenrir and to honor him and to bring some goodness to Fenrir, to show him that not everybody hates him, that he can be loved, that he can have positivity. Will this stop Ragnarok? No, probably not. But maybe, just maybe, it'll make his incarceration just a little bit better. Now, going to the Viking times, there is no evidence of Fenrir worship at all in Scandinavia. He was viewed as an enemy. He was to be feared. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show that he's known as marsh dweller. That's what Fenrir means. Well, marshes were seen as evil by the Nordic Scandinavians. And so just the name alone basically screams, "Hey, I'm evil," which, as I just got done saying, I don't believe he was. Now, in modern times with modern Norse pagans, there is Fenrir worship. Now, not a lot. Most still view him as the bad guy, the enemy. However, there are some who do worship Fenrir. Ways that you can honor Fenrir is to be true, honest. Honesty is a big thing. Stand up for yourself. Do not allow yourself to get bullied. A good friend of mine has a saying that really hits home at this point. Do no harm, but take no shit. I love that phrase. So Fenrir is the embodiment of a chained beast. So when you need to unleash your inner beast, it's Fenrir who can help. Whether you need to unleash that beast to do a better workout, or maybe you're in the military and you need to, unleash it to survive, or any situation that you might be in which you need to unchain your beast, Fenrir is who you pray to. Offerings to Fenrir include things like bones, meat, and like all the other Norse gods, mead. There's one other offering to Fenrir which is a little odd, and I'm going to continue my story to lead into it. Eventually, my hands healed up enough that I can start doing things again, and I had a couple good days of being able to start catching up on my work, my projects, and everything. And then I got very, very sick. Got hit with the flu, and I was out for a couple days. Just a day or two after recovering, I actually tore the muscle in my neck, which was absolutely excruciating. It was by far the worst pain I have ever been in my entire life. And as I'm sitting there on the couch, not moving, just trying to exist, really, it took everything in me to just sit there and exist. The pain was so bad. I remembered something that I had read a couple weeks earlier when researching Fenrir, and one of the is that you can offer Fenrir your pain. Figured it's worth a shot. So I prayed to Fenrir and I offered him my pain. And I swear, within about 10 to 20 seconds of doing that, I went from the most excruciating pain of my life to a mild annoyance. There's no reason for the pain to have subsided at all, let alone that much, especially that quickly. That allowed me to start living again, to do the things I needed to do, to do the stretches, to put the ointment and everything on my neck to allow it to heal. Fenrir took my pain. Since then, I have offered him pain, both emotional and physical, when I got to the point where I really needed some taken away. And every time he has come through for me. And I did make an offering to Fenrir after finally healing up that may be a little odd, but it seemed to have been well received. I wanted to make an offering to Fenrir as a thank you, and I have a couple dogs, so I had a box of milk bones, and I thought, I'm going to offer one to Fenrir as a thank you. So I went outside, got a fire going in the fire pit, tossed in the milk bones, said a prayer to Fenrir, thanking him and offering the essence of that milk bone to him, which, as far as I can tell, was it was well received. So Yeah, that was interesting. I, I was a little, I don't know, that seemed like a weird thing to do, but it also seemed like the right thing to do. So, kind of have to go with your gut when doing these kind of things. But bottom line is Fenrir is not something to or someone to be feared. He's not a monster. He is, in my opinion, misunderstood and poorly treated, and really could just use a little bit of love and positivity. So if you choose to work with Fenrir, you can offer him your pain. He can help you out in that regard. Um, you know, I have on my list of meditations that I want to try is actually a meditation to try to connect with Fenrir and try to calm him down the way I would try to calm down my own dogs. Now, obviously, a wolf and a dog are very different, and this is, a Asgardian dog, wolf. So, who knows if this is a good idea. I'll keep you posted when I finally get around to trying it. But, Fenrir is definitely one of the gods that I work with on a regular basis. And actually, now that I think of it, perhaps that's why I don't have a strong connection with Odin. Maybe. Not sure. But, so, I hope you learned something in this episode. I hope, you came away with a different perspective. And maybe a lesson to not take the mythology and the face value, but to kind of look at it from different perspectives, because this is not the only story in which the way it looks on the face, where one god is in the right or the wrong, but maybe it's the opposite in reality. And we'll cover more of those as we continue along. I do want to thank you all for continuing to listen to the Norse Code. As I'm recording this, I'm just about to hit 1,500 downloads, and that's just in the podcast, not even counting YouTube. And I just found out last week that we have listeners from all over the world, except South America. So if you are listening from someplace outside of the United States, thank you. I never expected to become worldwide by any means. I thought I'd have a handful of listeners here in the States, maybe in Canada. But I was just flabbergasted when I saw that I have global reach. That kind of blew my mind a little bit. So thank you to everybody internationally, to everybody here in the States, for making this so much more than I ever thought it might actually become. So thank you. Please, if there's anybody you know who's into Norse paganism or Norse mythology, introduce them to the Norse Code. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is the Norse Code Podcast. Follow us on Facebook, the Norse Code Podcast. Follow me on Instagram, Skeggy and that's SKEGGI_VETR. So again, thank you for listening. Thank you for continuing to listen. I appreciate you guys and gals more than you can possibly know. And one last thing that's will be coming shortly. Merch. I have had a couple people ask about merch. I have a couple designs that I'm finishing up, and hopefully within the next week or two, might be able to start having some shirts and hoodies and stuff available. So I'll be making a big announcement come that time. But thank you again for listening, and I hope each and every one of you have a good night. Until the next time, goodbye.